From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
New figures from the Census Bureau shows how much America's biggest cities shrank in 2022. And are those mayors and city councils doing anything at all to recover? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. Several months ago, the Census Bureau released data that showed the continuation of what the journal's editorial called the blue state exodus. And the conclusions there were that Texas and Florida make up about 15% of the U.S. population, but about 70% of the population growth. California shrank by about 340,000 residents, New York by about 300,000. And these are figures for domestic migration. So these are Americans that are packing up a U-Haul, moving from one state to another. Florida grew by about 320,000 and Texas by 230,000. And Alicia, now we have some more granular information the Census Bureau has put out last week, specifically on city population trends. And I'm wondering if you can just take us through what this information says.
The census released the raw data on population increases, or in most cases, declines of cities, large cities, and actually relatively smaller ones. And they started it from 2020 through 2022. They actually have a vintage series that go back, kind of have to be adjusted. But if you look at the population gains/losses for this recent period, 2 or 3 year period during the pandemic, you see massive population losses in America's biggest cities. New York City lost 468,297 people. That's about 5.3% of its population, larger than the city of Miami, actually, if you can believe that. Chicago lost 81,313. LA, 76,529. San Francisco actually by far lost the largest as a share of its population, 65,522. And that was about 7.4% of its population, which is just massive. I mean, Puerto Rico suffered huge mass outmigration, and San Francisco's loss during the pandemic is actually even bigger. But you actually saw a handful of cities that gained population. It's kind of striking which ones: San Antonio, Fort Worth, Texas, Phoenix, Charlotte, North Carolina, Jacksonville. Some of these actually have Republican mayors. Most of the big cities don't, or Democratic and progressive dominated. But for instance, Jacksonville, until this recent election, actually had a Republican mayor. Fort Worth does as well. And they're by and large located in Sunbelt states, but also red states, where you have the conservative governance at the state level, which has really kind of helped reduce taxes, one, and the cost of living in many of these places. So what you saw is a kind of an arbitrage opportunity during the pandemic, where you had a lot of people move out of these big cities in blue states now that there was an opportunity to work remotely, and they moved to cities or suburbs in primarily red states like Phoenix, Jacksonville, Orlando's another one. And yes, it's one reason is the taxes, cost of living, but then, we can get into this a little more later, but it's just the crime. The crime just surged in these big cities during the pandemic, and it was already creeping upward before that. So people were really looking for safer places.
It does strike me that COVID is a big part of this story. And to underline the timing here, this new census data goes through July of 2022. And the end of the COVID pandemic response varied greatly by city to city and by state to state. In some places, COVID, the pandemic, and those policies were long over by July 2022. And my recollection, at least, is in some places they were not. And so, Kim, part of what I find fascinating about these figures is that this shows those mayors, those city councils, what they have lost over the past 2 years. And maybe some of those people have started trickling back to those cities. Workplaces are implementing office mandates. You have to come in 2 or 3 days a week. Maybe that is pushing some people who had left for the suburbs to move back into the city, or to maybe not into the core city center, but areas around it. And it strikes me that we're going to have to wait for the 2023 data to see how much of a bounce back there is. But if cities and mayors are trying to make the sale to their former residents, come back, COVID is over, we're reopened, everything is fine, it seems to me that they're doing a pretty awful job of it, particularly with the crime and disorder that is taking places in a lot of these cities now.
Right, because that's not much of a pitch. It was bad enough that you had these extended lockdowns where people were I mean, let's just be clear, basically imprisoned in their houses, given how strict these rules were. And a lot of people chose to flee. And now you have these mayors and saying, oh, yeah, got to come back. You've got corporations saying, hey, we're going to require you to come back. But it's not a very compelling prospect because alongside this, what you've also seen is an extraordinary rise in crime in cities. There's obviously just been a crime spiral in a lot of major places. You're also seeing exorbitant rents. So a lot of people just don't want to deal with that. And that is also a spiral because as more people leave and some of these cities face the loss in revenue or real estate industry sees fewer dollars coming in, one knee-jerk reaction is to raise prices to try to make up for the shortfall. That just exacerbates the problem. But I think the biggest thing has just been also the fact that this crime is also causing, and these rents are causing big retailers to shut down as well too. And so these urban centers anymore, there's not a lot there to sell. They're almost these kind of deserts, urban deserts, where the commercial and retail have all shut down, where people aren't coming back to work, where tourists have been wary of coming to visit because they're hearing stories about crime. Who wants to live in that? And this comes meantime as Ron DeSantis is launching his bid for the Republican nomination. And of course, his big argument is come to Florida, where we didn't have any of that, and where our cities are well maintained. And, Alicia was going through that list of the cities with the largest numeric gains. And I just did a quick tally of that. 9 of them were in Florida or Texas, 1 in Arizona, 2 in Nevada, 1 in North Carolina. These are the sort of places that especially young workers with young families feel that they can afford a home, that they're not going to get mugged, that their car isn't going to get jacked, where there are stores that they can go to. It's a kind of quality of lifestyle thing. And the city situation is just getting worse, not better.